Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking that it left an entire classroom speechless? A moment so drenched in cruelty and prejudice, yet bursting with the power to spark an unimaginable transformation. Picture a black student ridiculed by his teacher and challenged to solve an advanced math problem far beyond his grade, delivered as a condescending joke meant to humiliate him. But what happens next defies every expectation. What unfolds is a roller coaster of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate reckoning. In this heart-pounding story, you'll see how a simple classroom taunt ignited a chain of events that nobody saw coming and rocked one entire community to its core. The city of High Ridge prided itself on diversity and upward mobility. Yet beneath its welcoming veneer lay pockets of tension and prejudice. Nestled in a quiet residential neighborhood on the west side of town stood Greenbridge High School, a sturdy brick building that had educated generations. Over the decades, the school had produced teachers, nurses, entrepreneurs, and even a few professional athletes. Yet, as progressive as High Ridge claimed to be, the walls of Greenbridge High still echoed with unspoken biases. The story begins on a chilly Monday morning in late October. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot as students shuffled through the front doors, backpacks slung over their shoulders. The large, color-coded hallways bustled with activity, alive with the chatter of weekend recaps, upcoming exams, and everyday teenage drama. Posters promoting the upcoming winter dance lined the corridors, boasting bright fonts and catchy slogans. It was a typical day until it wasn't. In room 204, Mrs. Lydia Kensington's algebra class was about to begin. Mrs. Kensington had grown up in High Ridge and returned after college to teach math at Greenbridge. Rumor had it she'd once been a brilliant student, lauded by teachers and featured in local newspapers. But the years since her triumphant return to her hometown had worn on her. The spark in her eyes dimmed as she contended with an overcrowded classroom and an administration demanding constant test score improvements. While she never explicitly voiced prejudice, many students claimed they sensed a certain dismissiveness, especially toward those who didn't fit her ideal image of a model pupil. 20 desks stood arranged in neat rows, each one occupied by a student waiting for the day's lesson to begin. Posters promoting Pi Day and algebraic fun decorated the walls, trying to inject color into an otherwise drab environment. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, giving the room a cold, clinical feel, like a place meant for stern lessons rather than creative learning. Standing at the front, a whiteboard marker in hand, Mrs. Kensington delivered the day's objectives. "We'll be reviewing quadratic equations and practicing simplification." Her tone was practiced, her eyes scanning the room in habitual routine. She ended with a perfunctory, "Any questions?" Usually this prompted a sea of silence, but in the second row sat Marcus Johnson, a quiet, bright, and shy black teenager. That morning, Marcus had woken up with a pounding heart, determined to push himself to excel, inspired by a YouTube video he'd seen the night before. It was an interview with a Stanford University math professor talking about underrepresented minorities in STEM. That professor had mentioned that potential often goes unnoticed in students from marginalized backgrounds. Marcus felt deeply and personally that the professor was talking directly to him. He had dreams of doing something big one day, perhaps engineering or software development. He wanted to leave his mark on the world, to show others that brilliance and genius aren't confined to any one group. He raised his hand and asked a thoughtful, albeit slightly advanced question about the significance of factoring polynomials. It was the kind of question that revealed curiosity, beyond the standard curriculum. A murmur rippled across the room. A few heads turned toward Marcus with faint surprise. Typically, Mrs. Kensington encouraged curiosity, at least for students she deemed gifted. But today, for reasons nobody could quite understand, she paused, eyebrows furrowing in annoyance. "Marcus," she said, half sighing, "since you're feeling so enthusiastic, why not try out a problem from the honors math class?" The comment initially sounded like an invitation, but her smirk revealed it as something else. It was less of a compliment and more of a challenge, a jab. Marcus swallowed and felt a sudden lump in his throat. Still, he braced himself for whatever was coming next. Little did he know, that moment marked the beginning of an unraveling one that would set the entire school on edge. Marcus Johnson had transferred to Greenbridge High at the beginning of the school year. His parents, Paul and Anita Johnson, were middle-class professionals who had moved from the south side of Chicago to High Ridge for better job opportunities and a safer neighborhood. They poured their savings into a modest, small home in the suburbs, hoping to provide Marcus with the best possible education. While Greenbridge High was known for its robust academic resources, it also had a fair share of complexities that came with an increasingly diverse student body. Marcus, at 16, was an introverted soul who found solace in books and numbers. At his old school, he'd been placed in an advanced math track. He had a knack for seeing patterns where others saw chaos for solving puzzles that left classmates stumped. Although not outspoken, he was kind-hearted and always willing to help a friend struggling with math homework. But in transferring to Greenbridge, certain records were lost or mishandled, and he ended up in a standard algebra class rather than the honors track. Marcus was told that the scheduling mix-up would be sorted out eventually, but weeks passed and nothing changed. He'd tried to approach the guidance counselor, Ms. Linda Hoffman, to explain how elementary the coursework felt. Ms. Hoffman had nodded sympathetically, but an overwhelming administrative backlog meant Marcus was told to wait until next semester, when the class rosters would be revised again. Frustrated but patient, Marcus decided he'd do his best with the resources he currently had. In the meantime, he supplemented his lessons with free online math tutorials from Khan Academy, recognizing it as a real boon to keep his advanced skills sharp. Though he didn't talk much in class, he was always engaged, scribbling away in a small notebook whenever an idea struck him or whenever the teacher mentioned something that piqued his curiosity. He'd even started exploring topics like geometry proofs and the basics of calculus concepts, typically studied by students in higher-level classes or older grade levels. His quiet brilliance often went unnoticed by his peers, who mostly saw him as the new guy from Chicago. A few classmates tried to befriend him, but Marcus, inherently guarded, seldom opened up. This left him somewhat isolated. Although he never complained, subtle instances of prejudice nagged at him, like the way some teachers spoke to him slowly as if he couldn't keep up, or how certain classmates assumed he was only good at sports, not academics. Yet Marcus remained undeterred. He believed wholeheartedly that determination and talent would eventually outshine assumptions. In the back of his mind, the Stanford professor's interview replayed on a loop. Your talents can take you places beyond your imagination if you have the courage to show them. When Mrs. Kensington made that snide comment about him trying an honors math problem, Marcus felt a rush of conflicting emotions, excitement to prove himself, fear of failure, and a strange sense of humiliation. Why did it feel like a setup? Deep inside, he knew he had to rise above it. And so the seed was planted. This was more than just a casual comment. It was a gauntlet thrown. Marcus decided he would accept the challenge, head on, not knowing how drastically the course of his high school journey was about to shift. When the bell rang for class to begin, Mrs. Kensington walked over to the whiteboard. She paused dramatically before writing down a trigonometric identity problem, clearly out of scope for a standard algebra class. It involved advanced functions typically encountered in pre-calculus. The students gasped. A wave of murmurs spread across the room. One of them hissed under their breath. "What the heck is that?" another asked. "Is that even part of our syllabus?" The confusion was palpable. Mrs. Kensington turned to Marcus with a smug expression. "There you go, Mr. Ambitious. Let's see what you can do." She capped her marker, stood back, and folded her arms. The entire class shifted their gaze to the second row, where Marcus sat with eyes wide, scanning the symbols on the board. A swirl of panic and eagerness churned in his stomach. Part of him wondered if this was all a ruse to humiliate him. Surely it was. He took a deep breath, then got up from his seat and slowly walked to the front. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he forced himself to focus on the question, recalling the math videos he'd watched. "Let's see," he muttered under his breath, picking up a piece of chalk from the small tray beneath the board. He drew a separate set of lines to begin explaining how one might rewrite the function in simpler terms. The complex interplay of sine and cosine was something he'd only touched upon in his self-study. Could he piece it all together correctly? The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. From the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed an uneasy expression forming on Mrs. Kensington's face, as if she were mentally daring him to proceed. He ignored her and continued. Step by step, he jotted down transformations, factoring out common terms, and applying fundamental trigonometric identities. About halfway through, his hands started to shake. He could hear snickers from a few classmates who anticipated he'd fall flat on his face. But Marcus pressed on. He paused, re-evaluated the equation, then wrote the final simplification. Setting the chalk down, he turned around, heart pounding in his chest. The class collectively inhaled. Had he done it right? For a second time, seemed to freeze. No one could interpret the scrawl on the board, except perhaps for the teacher, and she studied it with narrowed eyes. A mix of astonishment and indignation flickered across her face. "Wow," mumbled a boy from the back row. He actually did it. A girl next to him flipped through her textbook, trying to confirm if that was indeed the correct approach. Even the ones who didn't fully grasp the problem sensed something remarkable had just happened. Mrs. Kensington forced a tight smile. We'll see if that's correct," she said. Her voice strained. "Now take your seat, Marcus." She turned away from the board, quickly erasing the work. Marcus barely made it back to his desk before the teacher started the actual lesson of the day. Yet everyone was abuzz, exchanging whispered comments about whether Marcus had just schooled the teacher on advanced math. From the outside looking in, it appeared like a simple classroom exchange. But inside Marcus's heart, a battle had been waged and won. The teacher's little joke had become a moment of triumph. However, the victory felt short-lived. He caught a glimpse of Mrs. Kensington's expression, stony, with a flicker of cold resentment. Something else churned beneath the surface like a gathering storm. Marcus wasn't sure if he had made a new friend, earned respect, or stepped into the lion's den. He had no idea that this was merely the first spark in a powder keg that would soon explode throughout Greenbridge High. 2 days later, a rumor began circulating across Greenbridge High. It trickled through the grapevine of text messages, social media posts, and cafeteria gossip. Did you hear that Mrs. Kensington tried to make a fool of Marcus Johnson with a college-level math problem, and he actually solved it? The rumors varied in details, with some saying the problem was from a Harvard University contest, others saying it was from an elite Olympiad. The core message, however, remained the same. The teacher set Marcus up to fail, and Marcus unexpectedly succeeded. The school's student-run online forum lit up with comments, some supportive, some skeptical. Way to go. Marcus. Show them what you're made of. Isn't it weird a teacher would do that to a student? Maybe the teacher was just testing his ability. Doubt it happened. Probably overblown. People love drama. I'm in her class. Trust me. She was definitely trying to humiliate him. In the meantime, Marcus tried to keep a low profile. He was naturally averse to attention, but the story soared around campus like a lightning bolt. Teachers from other departments eyed him curiously in the hall. Some gave him encouraging nods, while others seemed perplexed or even disapproving. The only person who didn't change her demeanor was Mrs. Kensington. She carried on with her lectures, seldom making eye contact with Marcus, acting as though the incident never transpired. Yet the tension was undeniable. She didn't quite scold him, nor did she praise him, she simply pretended he didn't exist. If Marcus raised his hand, she would barely nod at him before moving on to someone else. If he tried to participate, she acknowledged him with the most minimal courtesy. Classmates observed this frigid dynamic and either whispered behind their hands or openly stared whenever Marcus tried to interact. Then came the confirmation. Someone posted a blurry photo on social media, capturing the whiteboard from that fateful day. Though partially erased, one could still make out the outlines of the advanced trigonometric function and scribbled notes. A second image captured the final simplified expression. It wasn't perfect quality, but it was enough for anyone knowledgeable in math to see that Marcus's solution looked correct. Meanwhile, whispers about a conversation overheard in the teacher's lounge started to surface. Allegedly, another teacher had teased Mrs. Kensington about her cruel joke, to which she responded, "I never expected him to actually do it. Next time, I'll make sure the problem is unsolvable." The authenticity of this rumor was unconfirmed, yet it fueled the school's rumor mill. It also ignited a spark of indignation among students who believed that teachers should never sabotage students for a laugh. Marcus became more determined than ever, diving deeper into advanced math on his own time. He spent hours after school on Khan Academy, working through practice problems, forging ahead with calculus and linear algebra concepts. He told no one about how deeply he was pushing himself. He just knew that if he ever got another chance to prove himself, he would come prepared. Simultaneously, a growing fear gnawed at him. If Mrs. Kensington truly harbored a grudge or prejudice, how far would she go to undermine him? No one, not even Marcus, could have guessed how far the situation would escalate. But it would soon become apparent that the wheels had been set in motion, and those wheels were heading straight toward a dramatic collision, one that would lay bare the truths of bias, perseverance, and comeuppance in the hallowed halls of Greenbridge High. A week after the incident, the faculty held a routine staff meeting to discuss standardized test preparation and student progress. The atmosphere in the teacher's lounge was tense. The rumor about Mrs. Kensington's joke and Marcus's astonishing response had become a hot topic, both behind closed doors and in hushed hallway exchanges. Several teachers, unsettled by the idea that a student might be publicly set up to fail quietly, mulled over whether they should bring the issue to the administration's attention. Others were protective of their colleague, describing the event as a misunderstanding. Mr. Arthur Kim, the physics teacher, was especially troubled. He had a personal belief in nurturing potential, regardless of a student's background. Whispers about the racial undertone of Mrs. Kensington's challenge also bothered him profoundly. He recalled seeing Marcus in the cafeteria, often alone, diligently reading from advanced math and science textbooks. During the staff meeting, Mr. Kim subtly asked, "Has anyone else noticed a rift forming in certain classrooms, particularly around a student named Marcus Johnson?" He kept his tone neutral, not wanting to accuse or embarrass Mrs. Kensington. A hush fell over the room. Some teachers averted their eyes, while others subtly nodded. Mrs. Kensington pursed her lips, but said nothing. The principal, Dr. Caldwell, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "If there's a student issue that needs addressing, I'd prefer we handle it proactively," he said. "We're committed to ensuring an inclusive environment." He glanced at Mrs. Kensington, who offered a tight, polite smile. The meeting moved on, but the tension remained tangible. Later that day, Mr. Kim approached Marcus in the hallway. "Hey, kiddo," he said in a warm tone. "I've heard you're pretty good at advanced math. Have you considered joining the math club? They meet Tuesdays and Thursdays." Marcus, who rarely smiled at teachers, brightened a bit. "I didn't know we had a math club. I'll check it out." Their conversation was brief, but it served as a beacon of hope. At least one teacher seemed to believe in him, without judgment. However, the same afternoon as Marcus walked to the library, he crossed paths with Mrs. Kensington in the corridor. She barely acknowledged him, but muttered something that sounded like, "Watch your step, Johnson." "Don't think you're above the rules." Marcus paused, shocked that she'd address him in such a curt manner. He didn't reply, deciding to avoid confrontation. Yet her words lingered an unspoken threat that he needed to tread carefully. Among students, opinions about the Marcus versus Kensington fiasco started polarizing. Some kids admired Marcus's quiet brilliance. Others ridiculed him for trying too hard and showing off. A few speculated that the teacher's joke had less to do with race and more to do with an isolated clash of personalities. But the question remained, why would a teacher humiliate any student in front of the entire class? That was the crux, and the conversation often circled back to it. Marcus tried not to dwell on it. He focused on his new invitation to the math club. He hoped that maybe in an environment dedicated to advanced math, he could finally meet like-minded peers. Perhaps he'd even find a mentor who would guide him. But as he prepared for the next big twist, he could feel a subtle tension pulsating through the halls, an invisible current pulling him toward an inevitable showdown. The next Tuesday arrived, and with it came Marcus's first visit to the math club. The club met in room 310, a bright, welcoming space filled with colorful posters depicting famous mathematicians like Euler Gauss and Katherine Johnson. Marcus lingered at the threshold for a moment, taking in the hum of enthusiastic chatter. Students surrounded 3 large tables, all deeply engaged in problem-solving sessions. To his surprise, Mr. Kim was also there, chatting with a group of seniors. "Marcus," Mr. Kim called out, waving him over. "Glad you made it. Let me introduce you to the group." Marcus approached hesitantly. Some of the students recognized him. Whispers about the advanced trig problem incident had reached the math club weeks ago. A tall senior named Bianca said, "Oh, you're Marcus. I heard you've got some serious math chops." Her eyes sparkled with genuine interest. Another student, Jamal, high-fived him. "Dude, you got to show me your notes. I'm stuck on partial fractions." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time at Greenbridge, he sensed that he belonged somewhere. They were speaking his language, math, and that overshadowed any social awkwardness. Mr. Kim led the session with a short puzzle about prime numbers, then turned them loose to work on personal projects. Marcus found himself alongside a few juniors and seniors, practicing for upcoming mathematics competitions. His eyes widened at the complexity of their practice problems, some covering combinatorics number theory and calculus. Still, he was undeterred. He recognized that he was behind in formal knowledge, but his curiosity and knack for patterns buoyed him. He delved in, soaking up everything like a sponge. By the end of the session, he'd solved a few tricky problems with guidance from his new peers. They congratulated him warmly, remarking how quickly he picked up advanced concepts. As the group started packing up, Mr. Kim pulled Marcus aside. "You've got real potential," he said, resting a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'd like to recommend you for the Math Counts competition next spring. Our team could use someone with your instincts, and I know a couple of seniors who can help you prep." "Interested?" Marcus's face lit up with excitement. "Yes, absolutely," he replied, voice trembling with gratitude. Walking home that evening, Marcus's mind buzzed with renewed ambition. He envisioned representing Greenbridge High at competitions, maybe even going beyond that. The idea of proving himself on a larger stage felt liberating. Yet in the back of his mind, shadows of doubt persisted. After all, not everyone at Greenbridge High welcomed his success. His parents saw the change in him at dinner that night. He rattled on about advanced math competitions and how Mr. Kim believed in him. For the first time since moving to High Ridge, he sounded excited about school. They exchanged relieved glances. They knew their son was special. They just hoped Greenbridge High's environment would nurture that uniqueness rather than stifle it. Little did Marcus know that while the seeds of his determination were sprouting, the seeds of discord planted by the infamous joke were also growing, and soon they would threaten to choke out any moment of triumph he might find. Greenbridge High buzzed with mid-semester stresses, exams, projects, and upcoming winter events. Yet conversations about Marcus and Mrs. Kensington refused to die down. Some teachers privately encouraged him. A few rolled their eyes at the drama, dismissing it as teenage exaggeration. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kensington tried to maintain her usual composure, but found the whisper campaign around her impossible to ignore. One chilly November morning, she arrived at school to find a note slipped under her classroom door. It read, "Teachers are supposed to lift us up, not tear us down. Shame on you." Below that, someone had drawn a small, crude caricature of a teacher scowling at a student with X's for eyes. Mrs. Kensington balled the note in her fist, furious. She suspected that the anonymous message was a direct jab at her over the Marcus incident. She tossed it in the trash, but the sense of being under scrutiny lingered. That same day, the administration began a school-wide initiative on diversity and inclusion. They posted signs urging teachers and students to attend workshops designed to create a more accepting atmosphere. Some students rolled their eyes at the gesture, labeling it performative. Others appreciated the sentiment, hoping real change could come from open dialogue. Marcus felt ambivalent. He knew such programs often tackled important issues, but he also suspected that real change required more than posters and short meetings. At lunch, Marcus and a small circle of math club friends grabbed a table in the cafeteria. They noticed an unusual tension. Groups of students whispered while glancing furtively in Marcus's direction. One junior known for stirring up gossip approached them. "Hey, Marcus," she began, her tone dripping with curiosity. "Word is that Mrs. Kensington might be getting a formal complaint about you. Something about disruptive behavior." The math club members exchanged bewildered looks. Marcus's heart sank. He'd never caused any disruption. He was practically invisible, except for the math fiasco. "That's nonsense," Bianca interjected, scowling. "Marcus is the quietest kid in that class. What's she complaining about? That he solved a math problem too well?" The junior shrugged. "Just what I heard. Maybe she's trying to cover her tracks. She can say you were disrespectful, refused to follow instructions. Who knows? Administrators don't always get the full story." Marcus swallowed hard, unsettled by the idea that a teacher could fabricate something to mar his record. He'd never faced institutional backlash before, and he feared the weight a teacher's words carried compared to a student's. After lunch, he tried to push the rumor aside and focus on his upcoming math club practice. But a knot of dread tugged at him. That afternoon in Mrs. Kensington's class, the tension between teacher and student grew thicker. While other students worked quietly on an algebra worksheet, she walked by Marcus's desk. Her gaze flicked dismissively over his notes, and she said nothing. He felt a chill, convinced something was brewing, but powerless to do anything about it. The seeds of determination in Marcus still flourished, but so did the seeds of discord each day, bringing them closer to an explosive confrontation. Marcus walked into the guidance counselor's office one afternoon, determined to clear the air about rumors of any formal complaint against him. Ms. Hoffman, the school counselor, had a kind face but was perpetually juggling tasks. She waved him to a seat while she finished typing an email. Her office cramped with college brochures, mental health awareness, posters, and boxes of files. When she finally turned to him, she noticed the worry etched on his face. "Marcus, you look concerned. Is everything okay?" He explained the rumors about Mrs. Kensington potentially filing a complaint. Miss Hoffman's eyes widened. "A formal complaint? That's unusual, especially for you since you've never had any disciplinary issues." She promised to investigate discreetly. "But while you're here," she said, tapping her keyboard, "let's also talk about your class placements. I remember you mentioned wanting to be in a more advanced math class." Marcus nodded eagerly. Ms. Hoffman scrolled through his records, frowning at the bureaucratic tangle. "Your grades and test scores clearly show you're capable of higher-level math. Let me see if I can expedite that schedule change before next semester." Leaving her office, Marcus felt lighter. At least someone in the administration cared. Little did he know he had other allies he hadn't yet discovered. Behind the scenes, Mr. Kim had brought Marcus's situation to the attention of a district math coordinator he knew from networking events. The coordinator, Ms. Pennington, was curious about this sophomore, who'd been rumored to handle advanced problems with ease. She suggested Mr. Kim nominate Marcus for a weekend math workshop at a nearby university. Meanwhile, a group of parents had caught wind of the story, particularly those whose children were in Mrs. Kensington's classes. Some were outraged at the idea of a teacher mocking a student, especially one from an underrepresented background. They quietly mobilized, reaching out to the Parent-Teacher Association (PTA) and urging them to conduct a meeting about teacher accountability. Their request read, "It has come to our attention that certain educators at Greenbridge High may be discouraging rather than motivating our children. We demand transparency and immediate corrective measures." And then there was Rosie Thompson, the editor of the Greenbridge Gazette, the school's online newsletter. Always eager for a scoop, Rosie had been researching the rumor swirling around Marcus and Mrs. Kensington. She interviewed classmates who witnessed the advanced math problem incident. Their accounts consistently painted a picture of a teacher's attempt to belittle a student that backfired. Rosie, a junior, with a flair for writing, smelled a bombshell story that could push important conversations about racism, expectations, and academic fairness into the spotlight. All these threads of support counselors, district coordinators, parents, and the school paper wove together unseen. Marcus remained largely unaware, juggling the demands of daily classes math club and the swirling anxiety over potential retaliation from Mrs. Kensington. Yet the tide was turning in ways no one fully understood. Beneath the surface, allies and advocates were aligning, each determined to ensure justice would ultimately prevail. As November rolled into December, midterm exams loomed. For many students, these tests were crucial to determining their final grades for the semester. In the algebra classes, Mrs. Kensington announced a major exam that would account for a significant percentage of the grade. Immediately, worry spread among students. Her tests had a reputation for tricky questions and minimal partial credit. For Marcus, though, it represented a chance to solidify his academic standing, especially if the rumor of a complaint was real. A stellar test performance would be undeniable proof of his capability. He dove into studying with a single-minded focus, balancing his newfound math club responsibilities with a rigorous review. He spent hours in the school library after classes working through problem sets, creating flashcards and occasionally tutoring classmates who approached him for help. News of his helpfulness spread, and soon a small study group had formed around him. They admired his clarity and patience, which stood in stark contrast to the tension that sometimes emanated from Mrs. Kensington. On the day of the exam, Marcus walked into room 204 with a sharpened pencil and determination in his eyes. The winter sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting bright patches on the floor. He found his usual seat in the second row, neatly placed his calculator, and wrote his name on the exam paper. Looking around, he noticed the anxiety on his classmates' faces. Mrs. Kensington handed out the tests methodically. When she reached Marcus, she hesitated as though wanting to say something. Then she laid the paper on his desk. "Good luck," she said tersely, before moving on. For a split second, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. Maybe she recognized he was more than capable of acing this test. Or perhaps she felt cornered by the swirling controversies. Whatever it was, she quickly masked it behind a professional facade. The test was a challenging one, combining standard algebraic functions factoring and word problems with some advanced twists. Marcus's adrenaline surged. Each problem he tackled methodically, reading, analyzing, solving step by step. Time felt suspended. Halfway through, he glanced at the clock, realizing he was making good progress. He discreetly looked around. Some students were fidgeting nervously, erasing answers or flipping pages in panic. Marcus returned to his paper, determined to maintain his calm. Toward the end, he reached the final problem, a particularly complex multi-step equation that required knowledge slightly beyond the scope of standard curriculum. He smiled inwardly. It was reminiscent of problems he'd practiced in the math club. He carefully laid out the steps, mindful of clarity. By the time the bell rang, he had double-checked his work. He handed in the exam with a polite nod to Mrs. Kensington, who took it without comment. Walking out of the classroom, Marcus exhaled deeply. He felt confident, but also knew that confidence didn't always sway grading if the teacher was biased. Still, he clung to hope that raw mathematics would speak for itself. For now, he'd done everything possible. The test would soon reveal not just Marcus's academic prowess, but perhaps something deeper about the nature of the conflict between student and teacher. The midterm exam results came back the following week. The day was tense. Students anxiously waited as Mrs. Kensington returned each graded paper. She had them lined up in alphabetical order on her desk, calling names one by one. A hush fell over the class when she finally reached Marcus Johnson's paper. "Marcus," she said, holding up a white packet of stapled sheets. Her voice carried a sharp edge. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stood, approached her desk, and gently took the paper from her hand. Her eyes narrowed. "Check it carefully," she said curtly. Marcus nodded, heart pounding. Returning to his seat, he flipped to the final page. A perfect score, or so he hoped. His eyes darted across the red markings. He saw a swirl of comments in the margins, some praising a correct step, others questioning certain leaps of logic. But near the end, circled in bright red, was an answer marked incorrect. Next to it was a deduction of 5 points. He scrutinized the solution. It was that advanced problem he'd thought he'd solved meticulously. Reviewing his work, he couldn't identify any mistakes. Everything appeared accurate from the factoring to the final answer. He approached the teacher's desk quietly, waiting while she conferred with another student. "Mrs. Kensington, I see that you marked a step in the last problem incorrect." "Could you clarify what's wrong?" he asked politely. She flipped through his paper with an air of impatience. "Your method is unconventional, and you arrived at a solution that I don't think is correct. This step here," she pointed to a line of algebra. Marcus glanced over. "But that's a standard approach. I even cross-referenced it from a reputable source." She pursed her lips. "I disagree. Let's not argue. It's just 5 points. You still have an A, which is more than sufficient. Now please sit down." Marcus felt a lump rising in his throat. An A would be enough for most students, but the principal was at stake here. He believed she was deliberately docking points to reduce his perfect score. If that were true, it wasn't just a matter of pride. It was evidence of deeper bias. As he returned to his desk, he felt eyes on him. Some classmates had overheard snippets of the conversation, exchanging glances of dismay. Later that day, he showed the questionable deduction to Mr. Kim, who confirmed that Marcus's method was mathematically sound. "This is correct," Mr. Kim declared, shaking his head in frustration. "I'll talk to her. But you should also consider bringing this to Ms. Hoffman's attention." Anger and confusion simmered within Marcus. He wondered if it was even worth protesting. A standoff with Mrs. Kensington might inflame tensions, but letting this slide felt like surrender to an unjust system. Word spread that Marcus believed his perfect paper had been deliberately marked down. Some students rallied in support. Others accused him of being dramatic. But the fallout was now tangible, a conflict no longer contained to hushed rumors or subtle snubs. It had materialized in the form of a disputed answer on an exam, each side bracing for the next confrontation. Unsettled by the exam controversy, Marcus mustered the courage to approach Ms. Hoffman again. This time he brought copies of both his exam and Mr. Kim's verification that his disputed answer was correct. The guidance counselor listened intently. "Marcus." "This is serious," she said, examining the papers. "You have a valid case. It does seem that your solution is mathematically sound." She explained that he could formally appeal his grade. Though it was rare, students had the right to request a review by the principal or a committee of teachers. However, Ms. Hoffman warned it will escalate tensions between you and Mrs. Kensington. It might make your day-to-day interactions uncomfortable. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Marcus hesitated. He didn't want more conflict, but letting this slide would mean condoning unfair treatment. He nodded. "I'm willing," he said, resolved. Ms. Hoffman began drafting an official letter requesting a grade review, promising to keep him updated. Meanwhile, the unexpected wave of support he'd been receiving only grew. The math club started a petition to request that advanced students be placed in appropriately challenging classes, citing Marcus's predicament as Exhibit A. Mr. Kim co-signed. A group of parents who had already been alarmed about the rumored teacher sabotage found fresh ammunition in the midterm grade dispute. They reached out to the school board with concerned letters urging them to ensure that no personal bias undermined a student's academic performance. Among the student body, a few trolls on social media claimed that Marcus was making a fuss over nothing, calling him an attention seeker. Yet the general sentiment leaned toward supporting him, especially from students who felt that teachers sometimes unfairly targeted individuals for personal reasons. In the midst of this turmoil, a ray of hope arrived in the form of a letter addressed to Marcus from the State Mathematics Association. It congratulated him on being nominated by Greenbridge's district math coordinator to attend a weekend workshop at a local college, a prestigious opportunity limited to a handful of gifted students. Marcus was thrilled. The event would include masterclasses, networking opportunities, and a chance to meet peers from around the region who shared his passion for mathematics. The invitation felt like a lifeline, a reminder that beyond the suffocating walls of Greenbridge High lay a bigger world, one that could recognize and nurture his talents. He shared the news with his parents, who beamed with pride. His mother said, "This could open doors, Marcus. I'm so proud of you." His father, who rarely showed emotion, nodded firmly. "Give it all you've got, son. You deserve this." That evening, despite the stress of the grade dispute, Marcus felt a renewal of hope. He pictured himself standing in front of lecture halls, debating complex equations with like-minded students, free of bias and grudges. Yet as he prepared for bed, he remembered the overshadowing presence of Mrs. Kensington. Could this glimmer of an opportunity be overshadowed by her looming threat? As the winter holidays approached, Greenbridge High buzzed with final assemblies, festive decorations, and the anxious anticipation of a break. But behind the scenes, a quiet storm was raging. The official grade review requested by Ms. Hoffman on Marcus's behalf was scheduled for the following week. The principal, Dr. Caldwell, had convened a small committee of teachers, excluding Mrs. Kensington, to examine both the exam paper and Mr. Kim's testimony. It was an unprecedented move, one that signaled the administration was taking Marcus's allegations seriously. During a hastily arranged meeting, the committee reviewed Marcus's exam, cross-checked with the official answer key, and analyzed Mr. Kim's argument that Marcus's approach was mathematically valid. They concluded that Marcus's work was indeed correct, awarding him the 5 points back. This meant his score rose to a perfect 100. The committee further ruled that a conversation with Mrs. Kensington was necessary to ensure such grading discrepancies did not recur. News of this ruling filtered through the school's grapevine at lightning speed, especially after Rosie Thompson reported on it in the Greenbridge Gazette. Students cheered Marcus in the hallways. Some even patted him on the back, while others nodded approvingly as he walked by. It felt surreal. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He was recognized for his talent and courage in standing up against injustice. The question looming large: what would Mrs. Kensington do next? The following day, she strode into class, her expression revealing simmering anger. Without addressing the committee's decision, she launched into that day's lesson with forced cheeriness. But her frustration was evident. She assigned a massive amount of homework, then glared in Marcus's direction, as though daring him to complain. The real turning point, however, came when two other students, emboldened by Marcus's success, brought up concerns about how Mrs. Kensington handled grading. One claimed she'd given an automatic 0 for a late assignment that was only tardy by a few minutes, ignoring the extenuating circumstances. Another said she noticed the teacher consistently overlooked her raised hand in class discussions. These complaints reached Dr. Caldwell's desk, painting a picture of a pattern of unfairness and targeted behavior. Before winter break, the administration announced that due to scheduling reassignments, Mrs. Kensington would be temporarily removed from certain classes in the new semester. An email to parents and staff cited a need for teaching staff rotation and a thorough review of classroom management practices. While official statements never mentioned Marcus by name, everyone knew the impetus behind the shift. Amid the swirl of talk and speculation, Marcus couldn't help but feel mixed emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that the unfair grading had been rectified and that his future classes might be free from open hostility. On the other hand, he wondered if Mrs. Kensington had simply become a scapegoat for deeper systemic issues. Still, the overwhelming sentiment among students was that some measure of justice had been served. For better or worse, the teacher who tried to set up Marcus for failure was now tasting a bit of karmic payback. When January rolled in, a subtle but powerful shift took place within the walls of Greenbridge High. For Marcus Johnson, the new semester marked more than just a turn of the calendar. It symbolized a long-awaited turning point. The icy air outside still clung to the windows, but inside something had thawed. Gone was the gloom of room 204 and the oppressive weight of Mrs. Kensington's scrutiny. In its place stood a new horizon, brighter, more promising, and finally within Marcus's reach. The administration had officially reassigned his schedule, and Marcus was now enrolled in the honors pre-calculus class, where he truly belonged. As he stepped into room 312 on that first Monday morning, a nervous excitement pulsed through him. The classroom was more open both in layout and energy. Natural sunlight poured in from wide windows, and the air buzzed with quiet confidence rather than silent judgment. At the front stood Mr. Patel, a tall, soft-spoken man with wire-rimmed glasses and a warm smile. "You must be Marcus Johnson," he said, extending a hand. "We're glad to have you here. I've heard good things not just about your math, but your determination." Marcus nodded, grateful and slightly stunned. It was the first time in months that a teacher had greeted him with genuine encouragement instead of condescension or suspicion. He took his seat and scanned the classroom, dozens of students, scribbling equations, chatting about logarithmic graphs and competition strategies. These were his people now, and for the first time at Greenbridge, he didn't feel like an outsider. As the days unfolded, Marcus threw himself into the new curriculum with intensity. Complex functions, logarithmic identities, proof-based problems. He embraced them all, thriving under Mr. Patel's balanced teaching style. Unlike Mrs. Kensington, who wielded math as a weapon to assert authority, Mr. Patel made the subject feel like an invitation, an open door to deeper discovery. Outside of class, Marcus continued preparing for the weekend math workshop at the local college. His evenings were consumed with study, not from pressure, but from joy. The mathematics now challenged him, pulled at his potential, and made him feel alive. He met with other math club members to review materials, and the club's senior members offered extra guidance to ensure Marcus could keep up and contribute during the university sessions. Meanwhile, whispers about Mrs. Kensington's scaled-back schedule floated through the halls. Officially, It was explained as a teacher rotation and a routine review of instructional strategy. But among the students, it was understood that the fallout from Marcus's grade appeal had finally reached its consequence. She still taught at Greenbridge, but her tone had changed. No more sarcastic jabs, no more smug challenges, just quiet lectures and averted gazes. Some students noticed her shoulders stooping more than before, her voice losing the sharp edge it once carried. Back in Marcus's world, new friendships were beginning to form. Students from across different classes and backgrounds had begun to view him differently, not just as the kid with the math scandal, but as someone who had dared to stand up and proved he deserved his place. He found himself invited to study groups, science fairs, and even after-school clubs he'd never considered before. In the cafeteria, a few students from the student council waved him over one day to sit with them. It was subtle but powerful. Respect had found its way to his name. Then came the Saturday workshop at the university. Stepping onto the campus grounds, Marcus felt a tingle in his chest. The red brick buildings and tall trees whispered of possibility. He entered the main lecture hall, a vast auditorium, packed with young mathematicians from across the region. The keynote speaker, a black mathematician from the University of Chicago, spoke about equity in STEM and the importance of amplifying voices that had long been silenced. As Marcus listened, something clicked inside him. This was what he'd been fighting for. Not just grades or pride, but the space to be seen, heard, and valued for his intellect. He took notes, feverishly asked questions during breakout sessions, and connected with other students who, like him, had once been underestimated. Together, they spoke of futures in AI, quantum computing, and space exploration. For the first time, Marcus envisioned not just surviving high school, but soaring far beyond it. That night, riding home beneath a pale winter moon, Marcus stared out the window with a quiet smile. He remembered the cruel joke, the moment that could have crushed him, and realized it had become the very spark that lit his path. It was far from over. Challenges would return. Prejudice might resurface. But now he carried a fire within him that no teacher, no rumor, no system could extinguish. Marcus's story at Greenbridge High stands as a testament that sometimes the very obstacle meant to break us can become our launch pad to success. The moment Mrs. Kensington tried to ridicule him with an advanced math problem, she unleashed a chain reaction that exposed bias, rallied allies, and showcased the untapped brilliance of a young mind. Through sheer determination, and with the support of mentors, peers, and loving parents, Marcus reclaimed his worth and shattered low expectations. If this story moved you, remember, there are countless Marcuses out there. Students yearning for recognition, waiting to blossom when given a fair chance. Help us champion every voice, every talent, and stand firm against prejudice in all forms. Hit that like button, share this video to spread Marcus's inspiring journey, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine a light on hope and transformation in our communities. Thank you for watching.